Hello, my name is Cameron Henry, and this is my project on the electromagnetic spectrum, or light waves in our everyday life. Okay, so just to preface the rest of this presentation, I will be referring to the electromagnetic spectrum as the EM spectrum, for short, just for the sake of time. So what is the EM spectrum? The EM spectrum is an array of EM waves, or a stream of photons traveling in a wave-like pattern. These waves are mostly invisible, but some are visible, as you can see here. These waves do carry energy that's referred to as EM radiation or electromagnetic radiation. The entire spectrum is made up of radio, microwave, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. Now, what are the components of the EM spectrum? Well, the EM spectrum can be characterized by wavelength, frequency, and the energy that is a result of it. So these photon waves, again, can be characterized by their wavelength, or lambda for short here, and their frequency, or hertz, right here. Wavelength is the distance between two consecutive waves as it oscillates. As it goes down and comes back up. The distance between these two consecutive waves is the wavelength. As you can see here, there are many more waves in this bottom example, but the distance between two consecutive waves is much shorter. So the wavelength here would be higher than the wavelength here. Moving on to frequency, it is the inverse, or the opposite. Within a given period of time, the number of times that a wave oscillates or goes up and comes back down, again within a given period, so from here to here, is the frequency of that wave. For example, from this point to this point, this wavelength oscillates a certain amount of times, but the one below it oscillates many more times within the same given time period. That means that this wavelength here is much higher than the wavelength above it. Again, the relationship between these two is inverse. That means that the higher the wavelength, the lower the frequency, and the lower the wavelength, the higher the frequency. Now, energy, within chemistry at least, is the ability to do work or create change. The way energy relates to this is the higher the frequency, the lower the wavelength is. High frequency, like this example or this example here, is going to have a very high energy. Low energy is going to look more like these top examples here, where the wavelength is really high, but the frequency is really low. Now, getting more into the chemistry side of things, how is it that EM radiation interacts with the matter that it comes into contact with? Well, EM radiation can be described as the energy carried by the photon waves shown in the EM spectrum as seen before. What happens when these waves come into contact with molecules and their electrons is something called absorption. This means that the electrons absorb EM radiation, sending them into something called an excited state. All this means is that the electrons are absorbing this energy and they're moving further away from their nucleus. It causes the molecule, or whatever it is that the photons are coming into contact with, to become unstable. This puts the electrons in an excited state and moves them away from the nucleus, causing the electrons to want to come back down to a ground state or a relaxed state. This causes in the release of energy again. This phenomena is going to result in a few different things that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Now, our first real-world application is going to be microwaves. So microwaves contain machinery that output microwaves, as seen on the EM spectrum, within the walls of the microwave that penetrate through your food and interact with the water molecules in a very interesting way. Because water molecules are polar, there is a high concentration of electrons on one side and a low concentration on the other. As the microwaves bounce around the microwave, these water molecules are going to interact with them in a way that causes the water molecules to move around very rapidly. They're going to brush against each other. They're going to spin around really fast. This is going to create very high kinetic energy through friction. And this is going to result in high thermal energy or heat, causing your food to be nice and hot and ready for you whenever you open up the microwave. Moving on to our next application, we're going to talk a little bit about infrared spectroscopy. This can be described as a technique used to identify chemical substances by measuring how they absorb infrared light. How this works is you shine an infrared light through a substance or through any given sample. That light is going to go through that substance and hit a detector on the opposite side. This detector is going to show different levels of light wavelengths, and we're going to be able to see which lights are passing through the sample. When we know which lights are passing through the sample, we know which photons are being absorbed by the sample as well. And because specific molecules absorb specific protons, we're able to identify what molecules make up a given sample or substance using IR spectroscopy. Now, moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about the visible light part of the EM spectrum. This makes up a very, very small portion in between the ultraviolet rays and the infrared rays. The large majority of the EM spectrum is invisible, but this small portion is visible to us, and it makes up all the colors that we see every single day. The red side of the spectrum has the lowest wavelength, and the purple side has the highest right over here. So as these EM waves make contact with the objects that we interact with every single day, those objects are going to absorb certain lights and reflect others. As these objects reflect certain light, they're picked up by the retina in our eye and processed by our brains, and they basically allow us to perceive the colors that we see in our everyday objects. For example, if you pick up a red apple and hold it up, and you can see that it's red, but it's not because that apple is absorbing all of the red light or the red photons, but it's actually because the red light is one of the only ones being reflected into our retina. That's why it looks red. Moving on to our fourth application, we're going to talk a little bit about UV rays and how sunscreen helps us to protect from them. We know that our sun emits ultraviolet rays, and the very dangerous ones are actually blocked off by Earth's atmosphere, but the UV rays that do make it through can be dangerous, as their high frequency of the wavelength allows them to penetrate our skin and ionize the molecules that make up our cells. This can be dangerous. This is what results in burns from the sun, and this is what sunscreen is actually for. So sunscreen acts as either a physical or chemical barrier between the UV rays and our skin. As a physical barrier, sunblock is going to reflect the majority of those UV rays. As a chemical barrier, sunblock is going to absorb and scatter those UV rays, but the result is the same, right? That the UV rays aren't able to penetrate our skin and do any damage like they normally would. And SPF just refers to the amount of time that a sunblock is going to work for you. Now for our fifth real-world application, we're going to talk about X-rays. We're getting closer to the far right side of the EM spectrum. So the frequency of these waves is going to be really high. The wavelengths are going to be really, really small, and the energy output is going to be high as well. Because of the very high frequency of X-rays, they have a high penetrative power. That means that these waves are going to make their way all the way through our bodies, and that makes them great for something like X-ray scans, because creating an image using these rays, we're able to see pretty much everything that's going on inside of our bodies. X-rays are especially good for looking at our bones, because our bones are made up of molecules that have lots of electrons. Bones are also very dense compared to the surrounding muscle and tissue, which are mostly made up of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. So these images are going to show us very clear images, or decently clear images of our bones, without having to actually make any incisions. Now for our fifth and final application, we're going to talk a little bit about gamma rays and how they are used to fight cancer. Now, gamma rays are the most intense and dangerous side of the electromagnetic spectrum. They have an extremely high frequency and a very, very high energy output. That means that they are extremely dangerous to living cells just in general. But nowadays we know that not all human cells are beneficial to us, right? Cancer cells are cells that do not know when to stop duplicating and can create tumors and do a lot of damage to the surrounding area. There is a method that's been developed called gamma knife radiosurgery, which allows us to use gamma rays, which typically would be very dangerous, to target these dangerous cancer cells and to kill them. We're taking out these cells without having to actually do any incisions or cut into anything. This has been extremely beneficial for a lot of people, despite gamma rays being known to be extremely dangerous. Now, just to conclude, again, we know that the electromagnetic spectrum is made up of an array of photon streams that can be characterized using wavelength and frequency. Depending on the wavelength and frequency of these waves, they can have a huge range of effects, right? From heating up our food in the microwave to allowing us to see the bones in the human body without having to actually make any cuts. The amount of utility and benefit that comes from understanding the EM spectrum is absolutely insane. I had a lot of fun learning about it. And that pretty much wraps everything up. Here is my works cited page, and thanks for listening.